Jackson Radio Show.
Welcome back, everybody. Kevin Jackson here. It's the Kevin Jackson Show, KJRadio.com. And I have to tell you, this thing on statues bugs me for more than one reason. It bugs me because it's obliterating history. And history should educate, not scare. And I realize that, history can be formidable. There are things that have occurred in history that we don't like. The Civil War was one of those things. But this idea that we have to go around destroying these statues, and I'm going to tell you, maybe this will be controversial. I don't think it is. We had people fight in a war. Because we fought against each other, there were somebody American was going to lose. And it's a shame that everything that led up to the Civil War happened because brother should not fight against brother. We had fought for our freedom, and suddenly we were fighting internally over money, over who could control the industry, if you will. And let's face it, if you had slaves, you had an advantage. And so that's what we fought the Civil War over. We use people as cattle and chattel. They were the manufacturing engine, if you will, of the agrarian society. And there were a group of people that said, look, we can't compete with that. We can't compete against free labor. But the founding fathers wrote this out in the 3 areas of the Constitution that dealt with slaves. One was the enumeration clause, where the Northerners said, no, if you're going to treat people like cattle, then you have to count them as cattle. You can't count them as people. And people blame the Northerners and say, well, that's some Republicans trying to get black people to not be counted. But the reason they did it was they didn't want the South using people as cattle for one purpose, but counting them as people for another, because slavery would never have ended. The South would have had an advantage over the North by counting slaves as people, but giving them no representation, no ability to vote. Can your cattle vote? I mean, that's a very simple question, right? Your cattle can't vote. So your people can't. Your slaves can't vote. You either treat them as humans or you treat them as cattle. So we compromise, the 3/5 compromise. First area where slavery was mentioned, though not by name, and certainly blacks were not mentioned by color. And in the second place was in the Fugitive Slave Act, which said if a slave had been run off, then he would have to be returned to the place where he was a slave. And finally, the last place where blacks are mentioned in the Constitution had to do with limiting the importation of slaves, Article 1, Section 9, that said you can't bring any more slaves in after January 1st, 1908. That's the end of it. And so the Civil War actually ended up being fought over the notion of the Democrats saying, okay, we have a workaround for this. We will make the descendants of slaves slaves. And that's why Anthony Johnson, one of the first black slave owners, went to court over one of his indentured servants who said, I had served my indentured servitude and he's keeping me here forever. And the courts of the time ruled against him and said, no, you are a slave forever. And so black man Anthony Johnson owning slaves and suing to make somebody a slave in perpetuity. That's how insidious the idea of slavery is. And so it's completely everything about slavery is completely misguided, except the idea that nobody should ever be at the behest of another human being and held as a slave versus a master. Unless you're into BDSM and you want that. Get your safe word. There are people who want to have a master. Generally, it's related to sex. They want someone that tells them what to do, how to do, whatever. And, that's an interesting group, but that's voluntary. Outside of that, nobody should have a slave-master relationship forced upon them, certainly the slave. And so, as I mentioned the other day, it's a percentage of the population who were slaves. People think all black people were slaves back in the day. We weren't. We were not. Only just over 13%, roughly 13.7% of the people, of black people, were slaves during the time of slavery, which means 86.3% of the people, of black people, were not. Overwhelmingly, black people were not slaves. So this idea that there was this overwhelming, thing that every black person you saw back in the day was ridiculous. I'll bet you $1 to Rice Krispies that most people do not realize what I'm telling you. They don't know that, pardon me, they don't know that the overwhelming number of blacks were not slaves. They don't know that blacks owned slaves. Many blacks, wealthy blacks. At one point, somebody even theorized that the top slave owner in history was a black man. He owned 63 slaves. He was not, by the way. We talked about this the other day, but it bears repeating. People don't know that these so-called Native Americans, the Indians, owned slaves. Yeah, they were slave owners. So when you're talking about giving those tribal lands to Indians and so on and so forth, maybe black people ought to sue the Indians to get a little bit of reparations from them too. And now they want to remove the statues of white people who did nothing more than fight because they were told to fight. Robert E. Lee gave away his slaves weeks, it was months before the war ended, and became an abolitionist afterwards, fought for blacks, for their rights after he retired from the Confederacy. But they want his statue removed because these ignorant, silly Negroes out there who are being wooed over by the leftists, these white bourgeois cocktail sippers, don't even have enough sense to go look up history and say, why would I remove his statue? I argued the other day on TV, why didn't University of Texas, they removed 4 Confederate statues. Why did they not remove the LBJ building, the LBJ library? The Nazis removed offensive statues. Let's put it in historical perspective. ISIS destroys what it deems offensive statues. So I'd like to help the left continue down this path because it always leads back to them. Bill Clinton, savior of the left in the late 90s, now where is he? How is he being canonized? You think anybody wants to build a statue for Bill Clinton at this point in his life? The LBJ statue was unveiled in September 2006. It's located at the Quad in front of Flowers Hall. It's a near life-size depiction of the young Lyndon Baines Johnson, 36th President of the United States, as he may have appeared while a student at Texas State University, then known as Southwest Texas State Teachers College. Johnson graduated from Texas State in 1930 with a Bachelor's of Science in History and with a permanent teaching certificate. Commissioned by the Associate Student Government, the statue is the work of an acclaimed sculptor, Lawrence Lutke of Houston, Texas. Now, Lutke was a fellow at the National Sculpture Society and a corresponding member of the Royal Academy of British Scholars. Texas State remains the only university in Texas to have graduated a U.S. president or vice president. While Johnson's memory remains alive on campus, the LBA Student Center is named in his honor, as is the university's Lyndon Baines Johnson's Distinguished Lecture Series. This is the first statue of the former president on campus, and I say they need to remove it. LBJ was a cross-burning racist, hated black people, made our lives miserable, schemed against black people, saying things like, I'll have them, and he used the N-word, voting Democrat for the next 100 years. And he's gotten it. He's accomplished exactly what he said he would accomplish. And so schools honor him. Same as the very same schools that honored Woodrow Wilson, the president of Princeton University, former president who made the White House, who segregated the White House, segregated the military, resegregated it. And what about FDR? Assigning William Byrne, a segregationist, to the Supreme Court, as well as Hugo Black, a member of the KKK. Who could get away with this? Could Donald Trump have done any of these things we're talking about and gotten away with it? But you don't hear the left say anything about it. So I say to you guys, let's play it out. Let's see how far it goes. Let's see how many of these scoundrels have to go down the tubes before the Democrats go, whoa, I think it's a conspiracy. I think the Democrats know exactly what they're doing. I think the Democrats see this as a way to get rid of their history and pretend it never existed. Pretend that they weren't the party of slavery, that hung black people, that oppressed black people, that continue to oppress black people. Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama all eulogized Robert Byrd, a cross-burning member of the KKK, a Kleagle. They eulogized this man. Show me something like that Trump could get away with. Anything close. Anyway, we got a lot more to talk about. Keep it here.
Kevin Jackson
on the Black Sphere Radio Network.
Do you owe back taxes to the IRS or state? The secret to avoiding the IRS nightmare is to seek professional representation. My friends at Security Tax Associates provide the most cost-effective and ethical representation in the industry while helping to avoid seizures, levies, and wage garnishments. Security Tax Associates is here to ensure that the appropriate steps are taken to permanently eliminate any possibility of future tax burdens once and for all. For a free, no-obligation consultation, contact Security Tax Associates, 844-779-4177. That's 844-779-4177. 844-779-4177. Or visit them at securitytaxassociates.com.